Let's play Too Many Bones. This video is designed to walk you through the setup and the gameplay. So get out your game and let's play. Pause the video whenever you need. First, get out the battle map and place it in the center of your play area. Next, select a tyrant that you want to go against. For your first game, Mulmush is usually suggested, but Nam is another tyrant that is suggested for your first game. Place the tyrant card to the left of the battle map and also get out the day counter card and the day counter. Set the value to 1 and place it next to the battle map. Each tyrant has a chip and a die associated with them, and you can find those listed on page 5 of the rulebook. Place the chip and die on top of the tyrant card. Each tyrant has between 1 and 3 tyrant encounter cards associated with them with their name on the bottom of the card. So get out those cards and we'll mix them together with some other encounter cards. In the game there are some green colored encounter cards. One says base set general and the other one says base set solo. So if you're playing with multiple Gearlocs, choose the base set general. If you're playing with a single Gearloc to play true solo, select the solo cards. Now notice on the tyrant card at the very bottom there is a number with a kind of spiky symbol. That's the day number associated with the tyrant. So what you're going to do is take the set of encounter cards that you've just pulled out, shuffle them together, and then draw the number shown in this symbol -3. So for example, for Mulmush, we select 6. So it's important to know the difference between the progress points that's on top with a gear kind of icon and the day counter, which is the one that has spiky symbol to it. Now take the green encounter cards and the blue tyrant encounter card and shuffle them together and place them next to your battle map. Now get out the cards that are labeled special encounter and specifically get the ones that have the day 1, day 2, and day 3 symbol. They show special 1, special 2, and special 3. Put them together in order with 1 on top and 3 on the bottom and place them on top of the other encounter cards. If you like, there's also a encounter cover card that you can place on top of the encounter cards just to make things a little bit more of a surprise. Now get out the cards labeled Trove Loot and shuffle them separately to form 2 draw stacks that you put to the right of the battle map. Notice at the bottom of the tyrant card there are symbols representing the type of baddies that are associated with the tyrant. So get out all the baddies and separate them according to the type which is shown on the lower right of the baddie and match them to the tyrant. The other baddies will not be used in the game, so just keep them in the tray to the side. Now shuffle those baddies together to create 1-point baddie stack, a 5-point baddie stack, and a 20-point baddie stack, and place them above the battle mat. Leave a little bit of space because we're going to put some more chips here. Now it's time for each player to choose their Gearloc. If this is your first game to play, Patches is a suggested Gearloc, but also Picket is a good one to start with. You'll want to get out the Gearloc reference sheet associated with your Gearloc and notice a couple of things. The difficulty for co-op and solo is shown here, and also at the top of your Gearloc mat, you can see a little symbol that shows what that Gearloc is good at. So for example, Patches is good at healing. On page 23, it describes easing into Too Many Bones, and it gives you several levels to play. So we will start with the adventurer level. That's to get you eased into the game so that you can learn how to play well and have a good time. So what you will do is you will add 2 to the Gearloc's HP stat before starting day 1, and then you'll gain 1 training point before starting day 1. Also, if you're KO'd during the adventure, the dice in your lock slots will remain. We'll go over those things in a minute. But the first thing that we'll notice is that we will put a die with the value 2 into this slot for Patches' health. So now is a good time to point out that each of the Gearloc has a special color associated with them. So for example, Patches has the color red, and so the die that Patches use for their stats are all red die. So if you notice in the game, the dice come organized according to the gear locks. So for example, we have Patches here with the red, Boomer is yellow, Picket is blue, and Tantrum is gray. So that way you can easily find the dice associated with your gear lock, and the status die are in that area. The other thing that was noted about the adventure mode is that we gain 1 training point before day 1. So we'll go over training points in a minute, but we'll just put a single die up here with the value 1. Next, each gear lock has a chip associated with them, again using the same color, but it's got 2 sides. This is the Innate side, and the Innate +1 side has stars around the outer edge of the chip. To keep track of health, we will use the red health chips, and so you can just put those to the side. And then we note the number of health points, and Patches has 7 to start in the adventure mode, and so create a stack of 7 red health chips and place Patches' chip on top of that with the Innate side up. Now there is a tray of special die. Specifically they have initiative die and effect die. And specifically what we want to talk about is that your Gearloc's initiative die is in that area. So pull out the die associated with your Gearloc. So for now, just place that initiative die on your mat. And later on, we're going to go over how to train, use training points, but we'll just take this 1 and place it in dexterity. So our dexterity is increased by 1. Now, if you're playing multiplayer, just decide how you want to maintain the dice, but for solo, it's easy just to place your dice associated with your Gearloc to the side of your mat. There is a tray of attack and defense die. Just put that to the side in easy reach. Now, if you look at the battle mat, there are colors associated with the different columns, and there are lane marker chips that have numbers associated with them. Notice that the numbers match the columns and the colors associated on the battle mat. These markers will help us when we have new baddies coming in to play, and where should we place them. So just place the chips above the similar colored and numbered column of the battle mat. In the special die tray, there are initiative markers that will go for the baddies, and they have colors that match the column and a number in the lower right-hand corner that shows the column, and so place them on top of the markers. There's also a round die in that tray, so take it out and place it at the top of the initiative meter in the battle mat. Finally, make sure that you've got the Gearloc Adventuring Reference Guide and the Baddie Skill Reference Guide, and put them to the side for easy reference. Your play area should look something like this when you're finished setting up. Now let's talk about gameplay. For the rest of this video, we're not going to cover it in the order that the rulebook does, because we're going to try to teach it in steps to make it very easy, so that you can pause the video from time to time and try things out to learn how to play the game. So the first thing we're going to start with is placing baddies and Gearlocs out on the battle mat. So the first thing that we want to notice is the number of the lanes or columns on the battle mat. So the blue column is 1, the purple column is 2, yellow is 3, and green is 4. What this means is that the first baddie placed out on the map will be placed in column 1 or lane 1, and the second one in 2, 3, and then 4. And also notice that the initiative die have a number on there that shows the lane that they start in. Next, let's look at a baddie chip. In the upper left is the health of the baddie. In the lower left is the initiative. And in the very bottom left is whether the baddie is melee or range. Since this is the first baddie being placed, they will be placed in lane number 1, and since they're melee, they will be placed on the melee circle. They have a health of 3, so we'll place down 3 health chips. Then we place the lane chip on top. And finally, we place the baddie on top of the lane marker. Next, because the initiative is 3, we will take the initiative die for lane number 1 and set it to 3 and place it in the initiative meter. Repeat that process for any other baddies that you're placing on the mat. Notice that the initiative die are placed in descending order. However, if there is a tie among the baddies, then you place them by lane in increasing order. After you've placed all your baddies, it's time to place your Gearloc. So first, notice that on your mat, it shows whether your Gearloc is melee or ranged. Like the baddies, that determines the type of circle that they can start on. They will start on the gray circles. Now, during battle, a ranged character can attack any other character on the mat. However, a melee character has to be adjacent to its opponent. Adjacent does not mean diagonal. You cannot move or attack diagonally. Notice that there's a slight difference in the color of the lines. It's a black line for the orthogonal movement and gray lines for diagonal. That can help you remember. So because of this, you may want to place melee characters, Gearlocs, so that they can move and attack a ranged character. Or you may want to place them right next to an existing opponent so that they can take them out more quickly. The initiative of the Gearlocs is determined by rolling their initiative die, and there's different values on that die. So it's probably a good idea to roll the die first if you're playing with multiple Gearlocs, and then place them according to their initiative level. If there's a tie in initiative between the Gearloc and baddies or other Gearlocs, then the party determines the order in which these die will be placed. So I can place patches above the baddies. If you like, you can pause the video now and just practice placing baddies out on the battle mat. Limit yourself to no more than 4 baddies. We'll talk about what happens when there's more than 4 baddies later on. During a normal battle, baddies and Gearlocs will have to move and target, but we're going to skip that for right now and just focus on learning the basics of standard attacks and defense. In the upper right of each baddie is the number of attack die and defense die. For example, the Dragon Whelp has 2 attack die and 1 defense die. Most baddies will just have attack die, but some of them will have neither attack nor defense because they will use their skills, such as this bog frog. But in this particular time right now, we'll just think of this as a punching bag. Some baddies have an X above the sword, and that means that their attack value is dependent upon the round. So in round 1, they will have an attack value of 1, round 2, an attack value of 2, and so on. We'll also ignore the keywords underneath the picture of the baddie. These are skills that we'll talk about later. So the thing that we want to notice about this baddie is that they have an initiative of 5 and they have 2 attack dice. We'll assume that Patches has rolled a 4 initiative, so the Griffin Yearling will go first. These are the attack die, and the Griffin Yearling will roll 2 of them. Let's assume that the Griffin Yearling has rolled Bones and a 2. Bones are equivalent to a miss, so they do not hurt Patches, but Patches takes 2 damage from the attack die here because he has no defense. So we simply remove 2 health chips from the bottom of Patches, and now it's Patches' turn. Now, for the sake of the example, let's assume that Patches has already trained 1 point for dexterity and 1 point for attack. This means that if Patches does not move, such as the case right now, he gets to roll 3 dice if possible. So he has 2 attack dice that he can roll, and he has 1 defense dice that he can roll. After rolling the dice, let's assume that Patches rolls a Bones, 1 sword, and 2 shields. Just like for Baddie, a bone is a miss, but Gearlocs have a backup plan. The backup plan is in this location on the mat, so you place the bone in the leftmost space of the backup plan. We'll talk more about the backup plans later. For now, just know that if you roll bones, you can fill up the backup plan. In the same way that the Yearling attacked Patches, we also can use our 1 sword to attack the Yearling, so he will remove 1 health because he doesn't have any defense. That attack die is then taken back to the pool. So since the Yearling and Patches aren't attacking at the same time, what do we do with the defense die? We place that in the leftmost spot of the active area. That way the Gearloc can save up the defense for the next time that a baddie attacks. So now the yearling and Patches have both completed their turn, so we've finished round 1. Now one way that is easy to keep track of that is you can just at the beginning of the round slide the dice down, and as each character goes, you can slide it up to keep track of whose turn it is. The next thing that we will do is rotate the dice to round 2. We do not change the order of the initiative or re-roll the dice. We can just drop them down and repeat the process. So the Griffin Yearling will go next. They roll their 2 attack dice, and let's assume that they roll 1 sword and 1 bone. Again, the bone is a miss, so we just put that back to the pool. For this 1 attack value, it is blocked by the shield, so we take the 2 and rotate it down to a 1, and we've blocked the attack. You then return the die to the pool, and Patches doesn't take any damage. That's completed the yearling's turn, and so now it's Patches' turn to go. Now Patches can potentially roll 3 dice, 2 attack dice, and 1 defense, but there's already 1 defense die in the active slot, so he cannot roll any defense die because the active area takes away from the dice that they're getting ready to roll. So Patches can really only roll 2 attack die. So Patches rolls his 2 attack die. Let's assume that one of them is a bone. Again, he can put that in his backup plan, and he's able to attack the yearling with 1. As a result, we remove 1 health from the yearling, which brings him down to 0. So now you take the baddie and put it in the defeated baddie area, and take the lane marker and place it above the column, and take his initiative die and place it on top of the lane marker chip so that any baddie that comes on again can use lane 1. Since the yearling was the only enemy, you've now completed the battle. If you'll notice, on one side of the round die there's a drop of blood, and that represents that from round 6 on is the fatigue rounds. And this will affect battles in 2 ways. First, all units on the battle mat at the beginning of the round will lose 1 health, and that is unblockable. The other way it affects battle is that all units can now move diagonally. Most baddies do not have defense, but some do, like this dragon whelp. That works in a similar fashion to the Gearlocs, but the baddies don't have an active slot, so you just place the defense die on top of the chip. Now, most baddies don't have a backup plan. If they do, we'll talk about that later. But for most baddies, if they roll a bones, you just put the die back to the pool. Now, if it's the baddie's turn and they have defense die on top of the chip, they have to subtract that from the number of defense die that they'll roll. So in this particular case, this dragon whelp only has 1 defense die, so they cannot roll 1. They can only roll their 2 attack die. And when resolving an attack from a Gearloc to a baddie, you subtract the shield from the attack value. So if Patches had an attack value of 2, the yearling had a shield of 1, then he would only do 1 damage to the dragon whelp. Now let's talk about backup plans and innate abilities. On the back of each Gearloc reference guide is the details of the backup plan for that Gearloc, and their innate and innate +1 talents. They start the game with their innate talent, so read for your particular Gearloc what that ability is. Whenever we restore 6 bones in our backup plan, we can upgrade to innate +1. Any attack die or defense die just are returned to the pool. Any skill die that are bones in the backup plan need to go to the exhausted area. You then flip over your chip to the innate +1 side that has the stars on it. Now you can use the innate +1 talent for the rest of the adventure. If you have less than 6 bones in your backup plan, you can use them once a turn to activate one of your backup plan items. Whenever you activate a backup plan item, you remove the die associated with the name for that backup plan and all the dice to its left. Then you move the remaining dice all the way to the left to fill up from left to right. Just like when activating your innate +1, any attack or defense die that are removed just go to the pool, and any skill die that were in the backup plan go to the exhausted die area. The exhausted area is on the left side of the Gearloc mat. Some baddies have one or more bones on their chips. These represent baddie backup plans and are described on page 15 of the rulebook. Notice that the bones and the skills or backup plan associated with them are in a purplish blue color. The number of bones shown represents the number of bones that the baddie needs to roll in all of its attack and defense die rolls combined in this turn. The bones don't carry over to other turns. If the skill requires a target and there are multiple targets, the party can choose which target to hit. Backup plans can only be triggered once per turn, and they trigger after resolving the attack and defense dice, even if the text seems to imply a different timing. Now is a good time to play a little mini game to learn basic battle. You can take your stack of baddies and draw them off one at a time and place them on the battle mat. Then just place the Gearloc right next to them and begin the battle of basic attack. You can start off with 2 training points and just arrange them however you want to try different combinations. You can try 1-point baddies, 5-point baddies, and even 20-point baddies just to see how it goes. Practice your innate ability and your innate +1 ability, and try to practice some of the backup plans. Once you're comfortable with that, you'll have learned the basic mechanic of too many bones. So pause the video and give that a try. Now that you understand how to do basic attack and defense, it's time to start dealing with the Baddie skills that are shown underneath the picture of the baddie. From a rules perspective, this is pretty easy because the Baddie skills are all defined on this Baddie Skills reference sheet. Plus, at the back of the rule book on page 31, there is a very nice index for all the different terms, including skills for baddies and Gearlocs. Some baddies skills cause effects that we track with dice. There are 2 types of effect dice and 4 of each type. One of them tracks poison, weaken, and stun. The other tracks flight, taunt, bleed, terrify, untargetable, and disable. Now the disable effect is a little bit confusing because all the other symbols appear on the Baddie skill reference guide, but disable doesn't. The symbol doesn't appear and the word disable doesn't appear. However, on the front and back of Boomer and Tantrum's reference guides, it talks about disable. Their reference sheets explain how disable works. Once you've gained Boomer's flashbang skill or Tantrum's Way of the Wild skill, you can roll these dice and do damage to the baddie in terms of disable. So you will place the disable effect die on the baddie to show that it's taken effect. Now let's talk about movement and targeting, and we'll start with the baddies. That's described on page 20 of the rulebook. Ranged characters do not need to move because they can hit any other character on the map. Notice that in the bottom of the baddie chip, there is a targeting symbol. So for example, this symbol says that the baddie will target the strongest enemy. So for example, in this setting, Patches has more health than Boomer, so the Dragon Whelp will target Patches. This symbol means that the baddie will target the weakest enemy. So the Kobold Tracker will attack Boomer instead of Patches. This symbol means that the baddie will attack multiple targets. So the Bogpaw will attack both Patches and Boomer. Now in this case, the attack is poison, so the effect is the same for all opponents. However, if this were an attack using attack dice, they will roll the dice for each opponent, starting with the weakest and moving up in order of strength. However, a baddie that targets multiple enemies will not target the same enemy more than once per turn. Melee characters need to be adjacent to their opponent in order to attack them. And by adjacent, that means orthogonally adjacent, not diagonally. You cannot move or attack diagonally. So melee baddies will try to move in order to get adjacent to the Gearloc if they're attacking. They can move up to 2 spaces, and then again, that has to be orthogonal. They cannot move diagonally. And if you'll notice on the gear mat, the black lines show the orthogonal movement, and the diagonal ones are gray to kind of give you an indication that you can only move and attack orthogonally. And even though melee characters do have a targeting selector, they first try to attack the closest enemy and only use the target if there's more than one enemy the same distance away. So in this configuration, the dire wolf pup is not the same distance from Patches and Boomer. He's 2 spaces away from Patches and 1, 2, 3 spaces away from Boomer because he cannot move diagonally. So even though the dire wolf pup will tend to target the weakest, he will actually attack Patches, which is stronger because Patches is closer. Whenever there are multiple spaces that are equally close for the baddie, the party chooses where they're going to move, even if they target multiple opponents. So the Kobold Elite here targets multiple opponents, and he could move here, in which case he would attack both Patches and Boomer, or he can move here, in which case he would only attack Patches. But since they're both 1 space away, the party can determine to move the Kobold Elite here so that he only attacks Patches. Now the party is able to make that determination because the Kobold Elite targets multiple enemies. So they could target either Boomer or Patches by going to this space or this space. The same is true as if the baddie targeted the strongest Gearloc, because no matter whether they go to this space or that space, Patches is the same distance away. However, if the baddie was targeting the weakest player, that would be Boomer, so the baddie would come to this space. If there are no routes to any Tyrants, the baddie will not move. This doesn't mean that the route is too far, so another way to say this is if given infinite movement, the baddie could get next to one of the Gearlocs, then they will move. So even though this baddie can only move 2, if they could move 3, 1, 2, 3, they actually could get next to a baddie. So they will move 2, even though they can't attack this round. However, if there's a baddie in all adjacent positions for this Gearloc, then this baddie would not move because they cannot, even given infinite movement, get next to the Gearloc. Remember, baddies cannot attack diagonally. So all this really means is that before this baddie can move, one of the other baddies has to be defeated. If a baddie is already adjacent to a Gearloc, they will not move. So for example, this Bog Frog will not move to attack Boomer, who has more strength. We've talked about movement and targeting for the baddies, but what about the Gearlocs? Well, the Gearlocs can attack whomever they want. Of course, they have to follow the melee versus ranged rules, and they have to be adjacent if they're melee. However, to move, they use their dexterity. So dexterity tells the number of die that can be rolled, but for each movement point, you subtract 1 from the dexterity. So if Patches doesn't move, he has 3 dice that he can roll. That can be any combination of attack die, defense die, and skill die. If he moves 1 space, then he can roll 2 dice, and if he moves 2 spaces, he can roll 1. And of course, he's limited to move no more than 3 spaces, and if he does, he can't attack or defend at all. One thing we haven't talked about yet is what happens when you have more than 4 baddies. So we're going to talk about the Baddie Queue. Now, as you're playing the game, you will frequently see the phrase BQ, baddie points. And that means that you're going to create a baddie queue by calculating the baddie points. A queue is a kind of line where people wait until it's their turn. So for example, if I have a stack of, in this case, 9 baddie points, which is 1 5-point baddie and 4 1-point baddies, that's more than 4 actual baddies. So we place out the first one, then the second one, third, and fourth, but the 5th one is waiting over to the side. This one will join when one of the other baddies is defeated. Now, of course, in reality, we don't just plop them down on the battle mat like this. We place them the way we've always been doing. Now, as the battle goes on, the baddies will move, and so they will change their lanes or columns. And they won't necessarily be defeated in the order of 1, 2, 3, or 4. So an example here, this dire wolf pup may be defeated first, but he started in lane 4. So we'll take the lane marker up, And now the next baddie will come on in that lane. And how do we calculate the number of baddie points that need to be there? Well, that's easy. We just take the day and multiply it times the number of gearlocks. So when we build the baddie stack, we always work from the highest baddie point chip possible. So for example, if we're building a stack of 9 baddie points, we will start with the 5-point baddie. And then we will place this highest value on top of the next. So we add another baddie for 6, 7, 8, and 9. Once we get to 10, we would do 2 5-point baddies. Now, new baddies will only enter after the end of round and any end of round effects. After the initial placement of the initiative die for all of the units, the number on the dice don't matter anymore. All that matters is their relative position. Certain effects may cause the initiative of some of the units to change, such as Tantrum could affect this baddie to drop two places in the queue, but the numbers are not going to change. Now you just have the order. Even in the middle of the battle, baddies or gearlocks may be added to the battle mat. Now, if a baddie is a 20-point baddie and they're added to the battle mat, their initiative will come at the top. So again, the number doesn't matter, but they will be placed at the very top of the list. The same thing is true if a gearlock is added to the battle mat in the middle of battle. They will be placed at the top of the initiative meter. If a 1-point or 5-point baddie is added to the battle, they are placed at the bottom of the initiative meter. Now, when a new baddie comes in, it may be possible that the place that it would normally be placed is already occupied. So if that's the case, then it looks across the same row to find an empty space, but those may all be occupied. So for example, this baddie is a range baddie. It looks first for any available range space. But if that's not available, it will go to the other form, melee, and start with lane 1 and continue up until it finds an empty space. Now's a good time to pause the video and play another mini game. If you remember, in adventure mode, you start with 2 extra health, and you also get 1 training point. However, in the game of Too Many Bones, usually the first day you will gain 2 other training points. So start this one with 2 health and 3 training points. We haven't yet talked about how to apply training points, so just apply them however you want. And you can do that differently for different attempts on the minigame. So in the minigame, you will simply see how many days you can go before your hero or your gearlock is defeated. Start off on day 2, put your baddies out on the mat, and then do a battle. At the end of each day, you'll just reset everything, including the health of your gearlock, and potentially if you want to move the training points around, you can do that. Then you'll increment the counter and try to battle the next set of baddies. Let's talk about loot and trove loot. These treasures help you defeat the baddies. The encounter cards will show you when you can gain some loot and trove loot. So for example here, the black chests are regular loot and the purple chests are trove loot. The Gearloc Adventuring Reference Guide shows you the encounter card icons, and so you can see it explains loot and trove loot. Trove loot is special loot that is locked, so you must unlock it before you can use it. We'll explain that a little bit more when we go over lockpicking. Once trove loot is unlocked, it follows the same rules as standard loot. Each gearlock is limited to 4 loot. If you go over that limit, then you just choose the 4 you want to keep and discard the others. Unless otherwise stated, your loot during battle has to be used on your turn, and outside of battle it can be used at any time or discarded at any time. In terms of usage, some loot is considered single use, some multi-use, and some permanent. When you've used a single use loot, then you discard it. And of course, for the permanent ones, you don't discard it after using it. For multi-use loot, you can just turn it to show how many uses you have left. So for example, you start with a maximum usage of 3 here, turn it to 2, 1, and then after this last use, you discard the card. In general, loot is counted as one item, even if it's multi-use. On the other hand, if it has the word heavy, then it counts as 3 loot. All Trove loot that is locked counts as 1. Once you unlock it, it may be heavy and count as 3. Some Trove loot are backup plan extensions. These are just extra backup plan actions that you can do, and they cost a certain number of bones. So just take the bones from the leftmost side and then move them over just like any other backup action. Let's now talk about how to unlock Trove loot through lockpicking. The details of how to do lockpicking are on the back of the Gearloc Adventure Reference Guide. When you're attempting to pick the locks of Trove loot, you'll notice that there are 3 locks called Lever, Trip, and Force. You'll pick the lock by rolling 4 dice. One's a brown, yellow, gray, and then this last one is an intuition dice. For the moment, I'm going to put the intuition die to the side, and we'll talk about the basics of lockpicking. These colored dice are called action dice, and each color focuses on a particular lock. For example, the brown one focuses most on lever, and the yellow one focuses most on trip, and the gray one focuses most on force. So each of them have 3 sides that is their main focus. They also have a secondary focus in which they have 2 sides. And so, for example, the brown one, the secondary focus is on force. For the yellow one, the secondary focus is on lever. And for the gray one, the secondary focus is on trip. So each of these die have a maximum value of 3 for both their primary and secondary focus. So another way you can think about them is they're weak in a particular area. So for example, the brown die is weak in trip, so it has a maximum of 2 for trip, and the yellow one has a maximum of 2 in force, and the gray one has a maximum of 2 in lever. Once a day, during the recovery phase, you can make a lockpicking attempt, and each Gearloc can attempt to unlock their own Trove loot or another Gearloc's Trove loot. For a lockpicking attempt, you will roll your action dice and attempt to unlock one of the locks in the Trove loot. You cannot unlock more than 1 lock at a particular roll. So let's walk through the lockpicking process with a couple of examples so we can understand how it works. So in our first example, we have a lock of 2 lever, 3 trip, and 3 force. And let's assume that we rolled 3 lever, 3 trip, and 3 force. Now, you'd think that you could unlock the whole thing at once, but you're only allowed to unlock 1 lock at a time. So we do want to unlock the lever, and we can do that because whenever our die roll is equal to or greater than the lock value, we can open a lock. So we can open the lever lock. Now, any dice we use to unlock a particular lock will be exhausted. The remaining dice, now, we would like to keep those values, but we can't, because when we attempt to open the next locks, we have to roll any of the dice that have not been applied. So what we would do is we would take the brown die, which we have used in order to unlock the lever lock, and place it in the exhausted die area. Then, if you'll note, on the side of your Gearloc mat are some red dots, and these help us keep track of how many locks have been opened. So I can slide this down in the very first lock attempt at the topmost little pipe. You see that there's these pipes that come off to the side, and I can take my first pipe and associate it with the first dot, showing me that I have unlocked 1 lock. Because we were successful in unlocking a lock and we have some more action dice, we can continue this lock picking attempt by rolling the remaining action dice. Remember, one of them is already exhausted. Let's assume we now roll a 3 trip and 1 force. Again, the second lock, which is the one we're working on, is the trip lock, and we have enough to unlock it, so we are successful. So we can move the trip die to the exhausted area and then slide the card up a little bit to show that we have now unlocked 2 locks and only need the 3rd one. Now let's assume that we've rolled 3F on our next attempt and we're able to unlock that 3rd lock. You can now flip over your Trove loot and use it in your adventure. Now let's walk through another example using that same Trove loot, and we start our attempt and roll 1 lever, 3 trip, and 3F. Unfortunately, we don't have enough lever points in order to unlock the first lock, so we fail on that attempt. The good news, if we fail on the first lock that we're attempting, we can try again. So on the second attempt, our second roll of this attempt, we can see that we've got one lever here for the trip die and 1 force. So we can add the levers together to unlock the lock. So we have a value of 2, which is equal to the lever value, and so we can use these 2 die to unlock that first lock. So we exhaust those 2 die. We move the card so that we're showing that 1 lock has been unlocked, and we roll the remaining action dice. So we roll a 3 trip, so we're able to unlock the second lock, and so now we can exhaust this die, and move the Trove loot up so that we can see that we've unlocked 2 locks. We have a 3rd lock to unlock, but we don't have any more action die. So as a result, we have completed our attempt for the day. So there are 3 ways that a lockpicking attempt comes to an end. Either 1, you're unable to unlock the lock that you're attempting to unlock, or number 2, you've used all of your action dice, or number 3, you've unlocked all the locks and you were successful. Now, if we were playing with multiple Gearlocs, another Gearloc could come in the same day and attempt to unlock that 3rd lock for us. Now, on the next day, patches can attempt again to unlock the remaining lock, and they would then roll all of the action dice from the beginning because this is a brand new day and a brand new attempt. So let's assume they roll 1 lever, and 3 trip. We need to have 3 force. We cannot add these up, so we're failing there. But again, this is the first lock that we're attempting on this particular attempt, so we can re-roll again. And suppose we roll 3 lever, 2 force, and 2 force. We can add these 2 force together and unlock that 3rd lock. So we've talked about lockpicking. What about this intuition dice? Well, that just increases your chance of being able to unlock the Trove loot. Whenever you roll the action dice, whether it's all of them or just a few, you get to roll the intuition dice as well. This symbol means that you get to re-roll any 1 action dice plus the intuition dice. This symbol means that you get to convert the type of the die. So the value stays the same, but the type changes. Now you don't want to flip over the die because you won't have 3 force, 3 lever, and 3 trip on this particular die. You just know that you can convert it to whatever type you want. This symbol means that you can take any one of the action die, increase it by 1, and then don't exhaust it. So now's a good time to pause your video and just practice unlocking Trove loot. You can just shuffle them up and draw one of the Trove loot and see if you can unlock the dice or how many times it takes you to do that. And remember to look at the Gearloc Adventure Reference Guide to understand if you have any questions with the lockpicking. Let's now talk about training points. This symbol, typically found on the encounter cards, is party training points, and you get 1 training point for each Gearloc in your party. Training points are the way that your Gearloc can improve their abilities. There are 4 stat die that get placed into the basic stats of the Gearloc, plus this area over here is where you can add skills. When training health, dexterity, and skills, those are always successful. However, if you need to train for attack or defense, you have to actually roll to see if you're successful. So for attack and defense, you have to roll the number of die equal to your stat, and if you roll bones, you're unsuccessful. However, for defense, you get to have 2 attempts. So let's walk through a simple example. In this case, Patches has 2 attack dice, so he needs to roll 2 dice, and as long as he doesn't roll any bones, then he can increase his attack. Now for his defense, if he had 2 dice, he could roll them, and if he rolls a bone, he can re-roll the bone. He doesn't have to re-roll the successful shield, and if another bone comes up, he's unsuccessful, but if a shield comes up, then he's successful. Now if you have a training point and you're trying to increase your attack or defense and you wind up being unsuccessful, that's okay. You just can't use that one, and you can try in another place. Like for example, if I started with attack and I'm unsuccessful, then I can try defense. If I'm unsuccessful, I can go to health, dexterity, or a skill, and that's automatically successful. Now let's talk about Gearloc Skills. At the top of each Gearloc mat, you'll notice some stars and the names of the professions of the skills for the Gearloc. Those professions show up as colored skill trees on the Gearloc mat. Notice also that some of the slots for the skills have stars next to them. Note that on each Gearloc reference sheet, it has a listing of all the skills and what they mean. You can see that the skills that have stars are listed, and the description of what a star means is listed here. It's not reliant on other skills to train. In other words, you can train them immediately. Now, some Gearlocs start with a certain number of skills already in play when they begin, such as Boomer. Notice it's got a circle around each of the elements that they start with, underneath Scavenger for Boomer. Notice that on your Gearloc mat, the slots for the skills are numbered from 1 to 16. Notice also on the Gearloc reference sheet, the skills have symbols that show the faces of the die, and in the upper left corner, there's the number of the die. That number is also printed on the upper left of each of the dice. And that's how you can know which dice go in which slots. And so, for example, Boomer starts with all of the Scavenger die placed in the top row of her slots. Now, the number that's shown on the dice when you first place them in the slot doesn't matter, because it's just a placeholder, and then you'll roll them to use them in the adventure. Now, there are some dice that the face does matter, such as counters. And for example, Boomer, their boom counter, we'll start it with a 0. Now, as we've mentioned, any slot that has a star by it is a skill that can be gained via an available training point. So for example, we can see that nutrients and med kit can be gained, as well as stem kit. Also with the tree, you can see that the arrows show the things that can flow after you've gained this previous slot. Now for Patches, the red tree represents the combat medic, and the med kit is the only one that you can gain immediately. So if I had a skill point, I could put a die in there for the med kit. Once I've gained the med kit, if I have another skill point, I could gain the fast hands die, which is die number 2. Now, to understand what each skill does, you can look at the faces that are shown on the right-hand side and match them to the definitions shown on the left-hand side. Now, if you look carefully underneath the dice icon key, you'll see that for each of the words or keywords here, there is in parentheses a series of letters that may be separated by a slash. These letters are defined in the lower right of your Gearloc reference sheet, and they describe where the dice can be placed after they're rolled. Now, in some cases, you can get to a slot in more than one way. So, for example, the napalm can be gotten from the frag through the big boom, or from the stunner directly. And same thing for the big boom. You can get to it from the stunner through the napalm, or you can get to it from the frag directly. The key point is that you don't have to have both of them. So for example, in order to build Napalm, I don't have to have Stunner and Big Boom. And also to build Big Boom, I don't have to have Napalm and Frag. Also, it's not necessary to complete one profession before starting another. So even though Patches has started the Combat Medic, he could start the Forester right away. Each of the Gearlocs has a set of slots that are marked as consumables and are connected by a yellow stripe. You don't train these skills, but you can gain them through things such as loot or backup plans. Once you gain a consumable, you'll take it from the storage tray and put it in its slot. When it's used up, then you'll put it back in the storage tray. However, if you have a consumable that is marked as a counter, it stays in that slot for the adventure. Now that we know what skills are, how are they used in the game? Skills are used in the same way that attack and defense die are used, but they can typically only be used once during a battle. So while attack die and defense die are typically returned to the pool, when you use a skill die, then after it's used, you put it to the exhausted area. But just like the attack and defense die, it takes dexterity to use a skill, so it takes 1 dexterity for each skill die that I wish to roll. The other thing to be aware of, once you roll the dice, you don't actually have to use it. Now it's already used for your dexterity, but let's say it's a bad roll and you don't want to use it, you can just put it back in your skill slot. From a rules perspective, applying skill die that does damage to baddies is not considered an attack. Now, some skill dice use a set of slots that we haven't looked at before, which is called the locked slots. Now, when you roll skill dice that can go in a locked slot, when you place it there, it will stay there even between battles until you use it. Once it's used, then it goes to the exhausted area. However, if you're ever KO'd, the skills in the locked spots go to the exhausted area, unless you're playing in adventure mode, in which case the locked dice stay there. Now, anytime a player has dice in the locked or the active area, they can remove them if they want to during their turn or at the end of battle. And of course, skill dice go to the exhausted area while attack and defense dice go back to the pool. Now, for most of the mechanics, we've suggested stopping the video and practicing the mechanic. However, for the skill dice, that's probably the most enjoyable thing of the different Gearlocs is learning how they work. However, some players have mentioned that it's difficult to actually build up the skill trees because you need to build up some of these basic skills and stats first. So if you've been playing Too Many Bones for quite a while and haven't had a chance to really build up here because you're always focusing on the lower stats, I suggest that you could play in an adventure type of mode just to explore the different skill trees by starting out with training points that allow you to buff up these areas before and in the main adventure focus on the skill trees themselves. Alternatively, based upon the experience that you've been having, you can make house rules so that it forces you to focus on a particular profession or a combination of professions. However, for now, you could do a couple of days of practice and just start off with some of the basic skills just to see how they operate and how they work with the locked dice and things like that. So if you want to, pause the video and give that a try. What happens when your Gearloc loses all of their health? So first off, don't be overly concerned or surprised. That will happen, and it doesn't cause you to lose the game. Your Gearloc chip and initiative die are taken off the battle mat and placed in the prep area on your Gearloc mat. Any dice you have in the active area, the backup plan, or the locked slots are removed from your mat, and any skills are placed in the exhausted area. Any loot that you have remains with you, but you can't use it while you're KO'd. Certain Gearlocs do have skills that allow the Gearloc to be revived if they're KO'd. Those are explained on the Gearloc sheet. Now, if all of the Gearlocs are KO'd, the battle ends, but the adventure continues. You'll skip the reward phase, but you'll go directly to the recovery phase. Now, unless you have loot that allows you to gain health points, you'll probably have to do the rest and recover step within the recovery phase to gain full health. Now let's talk about dangerous starts. Dangerous starts is a choice on some of the encounter cards. It's described on the back of the Gearloc Adventure Reference Guide, but there's a few things that are a little bit difficult to understand. When playing Dangerous Starts, a Gearloc will face off against a non-Gearloc opponent. Now, you don't really look at the baddie stats or anything else like that. You're just both starting with a health of 10. And so you're going one at a time, rolling dice, and attacking each other. Both opponents will have 3 dice to roll during the game. The non-Gearloc opponent starts with 2 attack dice, plus a poison effect die. Now, when it says a poison status effect die, it doesn't mean that it can only do poison. It means that there's 2 different types of effect die, one that has poison on it, and one that has flight and some other things on it. So it means to use the effect die that has poison on it. However, that die can also do weaken and stun. The Gearloc can choose any of the dice that they want, but they get to choose between attack die, defense die, and the poison status effect die. They cannot have more than 2 of each kind, and a total of 3 dice altogether. Now, the poison status effect die can do some pretty important damage to the non-Gearloc opponent, but there's also a reason why you might just want to choose the standard die. And that's because the dangerous die has its own backup plan. You can't store them, you have to use them immediately, but here's the effects that they can do. Rolling a single bone can remove a poison effect from yourself or the defense die from the opponent. Rolling 2 bones, the opponent loses their next turn. And if you roll 3 bones, you instantly knock out your opponent and you win. So now that you've chosen the dice, how does the game work? Well, the non-Gearloc opponent always goes first. They just roll their dice. So imagine that the non-Gearloc opponent has rolled a sword, a bone, and a weaken. Well, with the sword, they will attack, and the Gearloc loses 1 health. The bone, of course, is a miss because the non-Gearloc opponent does not have a backup plan, and the weaken is placed on top of the Gearloc. Now it's the Gearloc's turn. Because the Gearloc has weaken of 1, he can only roll 2 dice, so he chooses which dice to roll. So let's assume that he's decided to roll 1 attack die and 1 defense die, so now the weaken or the status effect goes back to the non-Gearloc opponent. Now let's assume that he's rolled an attack of 2 and a bone. Now a bone could remove the poison. It won't remove the weaken because that was decided beforehand, and it won't remove stun because stun means that you don't take your turn. But since the Gearloc is not poisoned and the enemy doesn't have a defense die, the bone is just a miss. But we can remove 2 health from the opponent. Now it's the non-Gearloc opponent's turn. They roll the dice, and we continue that process until one of the opponents is out of health. Now that we've gone over all the parts of Too Many Bones, it's time to put them together into the daily adventure routine. The daily adventure routine is shown on the top of the Gearloc Adventuring Reference Guide. So first you will have the new day, and so you'll increment the day counter. Then you will go over and draw an encounter card and resolve it. If you're successful, you will divide the spoils, but if you aren't, then you go directly to the recovery stage. And if you're successful after dividing spoils, you go to the recovery stage. And then after that, you repeat the cycle again. So the first thing that you'll do is the new encounter, and at the bottom of the reference guide is the encounter card icons, as you can see the icons that you will see on those cards. And the first thing you want to notice is that this symbol here shows that some of the choices result in battles, and some of the choices result in peaceful encounters. Now, it's very common when you've completed an encounter that you will gain some training points, and so this tells you how to deal with the training points. If you have a battle, if that's your choice, then you can see that the battle sequence is described here on the right-hand side of the guide. And finally, the recovery phase is described in the middle section of the reference guide. Now, on the back of the reference guide are some encounter terms that you might see, so it describes those. Then on the right-hand side, there's the art of lockpicking. So if you need to do the lockpicking and can't remember, it'll remind you there. At the top right is a description of special baddie chip icons. These are the icons that don't occur on many of the baddies. Then in the middle left is a reminder about dangerous darts. This is a type of encounter that some of the encounter cards might have. And at the very bottom left is a description about loot die that deals only with the undertow version of the game. It's not in the base game. So now what you should do is, if you have gotten away from the basic setup, you can go back if you don't remember and look at the setup and make sure everything is set up for your game. And I'll walk you through the first 3 days of the adventure, and then finally we'll talk about encountering the Tyrant. So in this setup, we will be using Mulmesh as the Tyrant and Patches as the Gearloc. We will be using the adventure mode, so we will start with Patches with 2 extra health and 1 training point that we can apply. So pause the video now, get everything set up, and apply the 1 training point however you wish. Don't forget that you can use that training point to gain any of the skills that have a star by them. And don't forget to add your health for Patches. So go ahead and pause the video and start it back up when you're ready. Okay, the day counter should be on 1, so the next step that we're going to do is draw the encounter card. You can pause the video to read the encounter card, flip it over, and then start it up when you're ready. Both of the encounter options are peaceful, so you can either gain 2 training points or a training point and a loot. Then we'll also gain 1 progress. Both of these options are automatically successful, so we go immediately to the Divide Spoils section. So you should now have received either 2 more points of training or 1 point and some loot. Most encounter cards will show a progress number at the bottom left of the card. It's encircled by a gear icon. Now, page number 8 says that you should place that underneath the Tyrant card, but it's actually easier to place it to the side, and other places in the rulebook suggest that. And then place any other cards on top so you can keep track of the progress. For example, this is what it might look like if you've gained 4 progress. So go ahead and pause the video now and gain your rewards and train any points that you need. Now you move to the recovery phase. And so if you've got multiple Gearlocs, they can all trade their loot, any amount to anyone. You can also do a lockpicking attempt, but we don't have any Trove loot, so we can't do that now. But all Gearlocs can choose one of the 3 possible individual options. You can also search for better loot. So if you chose the loot option, you can do that. You can search for better loot, but beware that you have to discard the loot no matter what. This matters because you will roll 6 attack dice, and for each bone that you roll, you can choose a loot card or reveal a loot card, and you get to keep one of them. So if you don't roll any bones, you won't get any new loot. The final option that you can do is Scout, and what you will do is roll a d6, which is found in the general dice tray, and if you roll a 1 to a 3, then you can reveal the top unrevealed baddie stack and see what it is. If you don't like it, you can move it to the bottom. So if you have multiple Gearlocs, you can reveal multiple baddies. There's no limit to how many baddies you can reveal. But of course, each Gearloc only gets to reveal 1 per turn. If you roll a 4 or a 5, you can reveal either a 5-point baddie or a 1-point baddie. And if you roll a 6, you can reveal a 20, a 5, or a 1-point baddie. And of course, if you don't like that baddie, you can move it to the bottom of the stack. Okay, pause the video now, choose your recovery options, and start it up when you're ready. The next thing that we'll do is increment the day counter to 2. and draw and read the Day 2 encounter. Go ahead and pause the video to do that and start up when you're ready. Now notice that you'll have your first battle. It doesn't matter which option you choose, you will do a battle. The first one's a little bit easier. Notice that it says for each round, the arrows will do 1 true damage to each baddie. Now we should point out, we haven't discussed really true damage before, but true damage means it's unblockable. So most damage you can block with a shield or some effect, but true damage is unblockable. Now, if you've done your practice, this should be pretty easy, and you will wind up with at least 1 loot, 1 progress, and 1 training point. You may actually wind up with 2 training points. Notice that there are chapter marks in this video, so if you've forgotten how to do the battle, you can just skip back to that battle section. Go ahead and pause the video and do your battle, and start it back up when the battle is finished, and we'll tell you how to deal with the end of the battle. Now, whether your party was successful or they were completely wiped out, you remove all of the dice from your active area and your backup plan. Attack and defense die will be put back into the supply. Any exhausted skill die or skill die from the active slots will be placed back into their normal slots. But notice that skill die in the lock slot can remain if you're successful. But if you were all wiped out, then it has to go back to its normal slot. So the really good point is you don't lose your skill dice when they get exhausted or you get knocked out. Now, certain game events do give you something that's called buff HP, and we haven't really talked about that yet, but that can wind up, you place the health chips on your prep area. So during a battle, when you take damage, first the shields will be used up. Then when they're used up, the buff health HP will be used up. And all of that will happen before you lose any of your health. Finally, when all of the buff HP is gone, then you start losing health. However, when the battle is over, whether you win or lose, all of the buff HP is returned. Now, if you're locked out, your Gearloc should be on your prep area with no health. But if you're successful, return your Gearloc to the prep area with the health as it is. Don't increase the health. If you want the Gearloc to gain all of its health, you'll have to do that during the recovery phase. Now, if you're unsuccessful, there's probably still baddies on the battle mat. So return the health chips and the lane marker chip, as well as the initiative die, and take the baddie and place it face down on the bottom of its active stack. So if you're unsuccessful, go directly to the recovery phase. But if you were successful, go to the reward phase and gain your rewards. So pause the video now, do all those steps all the way through the recovery phase, and then start it up when you're ready. Okay, now it's time for day 3. Make sure that you increase the counter to day 3. Draw the next encounter card and read it. You can pause the video to do that right now. So you'll see on day 3 you've got 2 peaceful encounters. You can do whichever choice you'd like, but notice that one of them is a Trove loot. So that'll give you a chance to practice your lockpicking. Okay, so now it's time to make your choice and see if you can complete all of day 3 without any help. Pause the video and start back up when you're ready. All right, let's talk about Tyrants. So we've talked a little bit about Tyrants during the setup, but now we want to talk about actually doing battle with them. As we mentioned before, the number with a spiky circle around it represents the days, so you must defeat the Tyrant by the end of the days listed on the card here. So for example, for Mulmesh, you must defeat him by the end of the 9th day. However, you cannot encounter him until the 6 progress points have been earned. You don't have to engage him as soon as you've earned 6 progress points, but that's the earliest you can engage him. So when it's time to encounter the Tyrant, you want to flip over their chip because on the back it has the standard baddie type of information. Also flip over the Tyrant card that describes how to set up the Tyrant and the abilities for those skills. The black and gold symbol right here on the Tyrant ship means that they have a special die that they need to roll. All the Tyrants in the base game have that die, and it's rolled with the attack and defense die. The Tyrant card tells how to resolve the face of the die that's rolled. And of course you win the game if you defeat the Tyrant before the end of the last day. For the very last thing, I'd like to return to page 23, where it talks about easing into Too Many Bones, and specifically it talks about making the game fun for you. Too Many Bones can be quite challenging because it's made for even the most hardcore gamers. But you can also tweak it so it's just a fun adventure. It's too great of a game to get frustrated with not being able to win, so you can make these adjustments as they describe on this page. So make sure you're familiar with that and enjoy playing the game. So that's how you play Too Many Bones. I hope you've enjoyed the video and you enjoy playing. No need to pause the video because you're at the end. Go ahead and try to defeat that Tyrant, but most of all, have a lot of fun.